sorry?
Nose guidal vane.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
The main function is to accelerate the gas at the most efficient angle to the turbine blade.
That's correct, yeah. Just like a 9GV, it directs the airflow at the correct angle, and for a nozzle guide vane, it's obviously accelerated because of the convergent shape. Okay.
All right.
Good. Good.
And one last question.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
The badly designed exhaust system will affect the nozzle velocity.
Yeah, will do. Yeah. It can cause possibly back pressure because it could be a reduced area. Yeah.
Thanks.
No problem. These sound like some of the revision questions I gave last year or a year before. Right, we've got 10 in the meeting ready to go. Okay. Right, we're going to move on. We'll finish off book 1 and we'll do some recap for today, and we'll try and start in book 2 tomorrow. Don't get too far ahead. But again, I can't show you the parts up on a hanger, so we'll try our best just to keep going with it. So we're going to start a chat with thrust reverse. Okay, why do we think we use thrust reverse on aircraft? You've maybe been in a big aircraft, and as you've landed, you've heard the engine going faster, but we're going slower because we've activated thrust reverse. So why use thrust reverse on aircraft? Why not just use the brakes?
Yeah, stop the aircraft.
Yeah, it helps slow down the aircraft, but why not just, we've got brakes in aircraft, so why not just use the brakes? Yeah, it's more efficient, yeah. It helps reduce the stress on the brakes. So if you maybe land in a big aircraft on a short runway, yes, you might be able to use the brakes, but you might have to apply the brakes for longer. So that can overheat the brakes and potentially take a bit longer to brake as well, and also potentially cause wheel fires. So the longer you have your brakes on, the more heat that's generated. But certainly having thrust reverser, we can help reduce the landing distance of the actual brakes as well. Okay, let's see my people coming in there. Okay, so you can see there in the diagram we've got brakes only. Again, this is just a rough estimate of what's happened in that aircraft. We're getting to about almost 3,000 feet, but we add thrust reverser on, we're just over 2,000 feet. So, about 1,000 odd feet difference. Okay, now it depends as well on the conditions, operating conditions, sea level, wet, icy, and that sort of thing. Can affect. If you brake in heavily in a car and it's a very wet, muddy day or an icy, snowy day, you can also cause a bit of skidding as well. So we have to look at some safety involved with thrust reverse. But certainly using the jet efflux, so the gases from the engine, and direct them forward of the aircraft at a certain angle, which I'll cover shortly, we can help slow down that aircraft relatively quickly. And as I say, if you've been in a big aircraft, you've landed and you feel it's slowing down, but you hear the engines going faster, that's because they've selected thrust reverse and they're directing the gas flow forward. Okay, so we're looking at what's incorporated with it. Okay. The requirements of a thrust reverse system. It must not affect the normal engine operation, whether it's in use or not. Yeah, we don't want to be directing gas flow at the wrong angle or restricting the gas flow coming out of the engine when it's working or when it's not working at all. If we don't select thrust reverse, it shouldn't be affecting it. So the mechanisms that are involved with actual thrust reverse should be out of the way, not involved with the direct gas flow out the exhaust. And likewise, when we do select thrust reverse, we don't affect the core engine. Okay, so the engine will still operate as normal. All we're doing is directing gas flow at a slightly different angle. Okay, instead of coming straight at the back, we're bringing it forward. So we're actually trying to go the wrong way, if that makes sense. Okay, so it must not affect the main engine operation. Okay. It must be able to withstand high temperatures. Yeah, we've got that hot gas coming at the back end, between 600 maybe 800 degrees, so still relatively hot. So the materials used must also be suitable to withstand those temperatures. And likewise, when you add an extra system like thrust reverse on, you're adding more weight, so we try and make it light but as strong as possible and heat resistant. So yeah, so suitable materials, normally titanium these days, very light, very strong, and very good heat retention properties. And main one, it must be fail-safe. Okay. In other words, what we mean, say we have a twin-engine aircraft, so 2 engines, and we select thrust reverse. Now, normally both reverse systems will operate and work fine. But what would happen if one engine did not work correctly? Say one reverse thrust system did not operate, but the other one did. What could potentially happen as you're going down the runway? What do you think could happen there? So you're slowing down, you select thrust reverse, but only one engine. Yeah, go on, Sandeep. It will turn, yeah, it's going to turn whichever way. Yeah, it's going to yaw to the side which is actually braking. Yes, you imagine you put brakes on one side of your car, it's going to brake to one side. So as a fail-safe, we make sure that if one thrust reverse system does not work, the other engine is isolated and doesn't work either. So we just have to rely on normal braking. That prevents differential braking, so we don't skid down the runway. So as a fail-safe, they must both work, especially in twin-engine aircraft. They must both work at the same time. If one fails, the other one will not operate either. And you just have to rely on normal braking. It'll take a bit longer. But better that taking a bit longer to brake and going straight than potentially turning off the runway and causing problems that way as well. So it must be fail-safe. Absolutely. Okay. Various types of methods we'll look at. Okay, the picture I've got there is good old Hercules aircraft. I had the pleasure of flying in those many a time. And they use reverse thrust by reversing the pitch of the propeller, just like we spoke about in Module 17. So going from a positive angle of attack to a negative angle of attack. Do you remember what that name was called in thrust reverse for a propeller? Anybody remember? Starts with a B.
Beat.
Yeah, almost beta range.
Beta range.
Beta range. Remember the angle of attack was about plus 20 degrees to about minus 20 degrees.
Minus 20, yeah.
Yeah. So by using on certain these aircraft, the gold Hercules aircraft, they can stop very, very quickly by reducing from the ground fine pitch to a negative pitch, and they will stop very, very quickly. And they can actually reverse this type of aircraft back away. So as well as reverse thrust and stopping the aircraft, they can actually reverse the aircraft by using reverse pitch. So it can land very quickly, turn around, and take off again. But normal turboprops, they can do reverse pitch as well and slow down to a point. They do not tend to reverse the whole aircraft. That's more a military requirement. So certainly that's one type of thrust reverse system. You know, reverse pitch on the propeller. But as far as jet engines, there are 3 main types of thrust reverser type systems. Okay. The first one is called the clamshell door. As it sounds like a clamshell in the sea. So you've got sort of 2 caps that come in like that. Okay, and they're integral to the engine. When they're not in use, they stay within the exhaust system, but do not affect the gas flow coming out of the exhaust system. But when they do activate, they basically block off the exhaust gas, and then as they close, I should say, they open out external cavities, which are 45 degrees, called cascade vanes. So the airflow doesn't go out the exhaust, it now comes out the side of the engines, or above and below, and angled at 45 degrees. And you'll find that for every thrust reverse system, it's 45 degrees. The next one is called the retractable ejector. I used to call them buckets, reverse buckets. That was a slang name for them, but they're called retractable ejectors. They're very similar in operation to clamshell ones, but they're on the outside of the engine. So this time they come round and then do the same sort of pincer movement again. You'll see one in a minute. Again, they direct the gas flow coming out from the back of the exhaust forward towards the aircraft at, again, 45 degrees. And then the last one is what's called the Coldstream Cascade Reverser. Now, in the bigger commercial aircraft, the side of the cowlings on the engine, they slide backwards and forwards, and as they slide backwards, they open what's called cascade vanes, same as the clamshell ones, again at 45 degrees. So it directs, the cascade ones tend to direct the cold stream air, your normal air produced by your LP fan, which is your main thrust. So the core engine still works as normal, but it's actually the cold stream air that's been directed forward of the aircraft. Again, all at 45 degrees. Clamshell door one, you can't see in this one here, but actually the doors are inside the exhaust. Okay, and you can see underneath, here's your cascade vanes, and there'll be some on top as well. So again, these clamshell ones, they come together, they close the exhaust off, but as they close off, they open up these vanes, which are 45 degrees. So the air now comes forward at 45 degrees and 45 degrees on top as well. Okay, but when they're not in use, the exhaust gas comes out as normal. Okay, it's a clamshell ones. So position there, that's them open, so they're out of the way. There's the cascade vanes on the top and bottom, which would be these parts here and obviously on the top. So as you see, the exhaust gas comes out as normal, no problem at all. And then when we close them, they rotate down the way, so they meet up together, so the exhaust gas doesn't come out exhaust anymore, but instead comes out the bottom and the top, and you can see there, same as these ones, at 45 degrees. Okay. But again, it's not affecting the main engine, it is only directing the gas flow a different position. That's all it's doing. So that's your clamshell door ones. Retractable ejector, similar sort of thing, but they use it on the outside, as I said already. So normally these doors will be out of the way on top of the aircraft or in line with the cowlings. And then when they activate them, they come out and round. And then again, block the gas coming straight back, this time putting the gas forward. Okay, about again 45 degrees, as you can see in this diagram here. So normally these will be in line along the top of the exhaust, okay, like it is here. And then when they come round, they will close off and you'll direct the gas down and up at 45 degrees as well. Again, not affecting the core engine. They operate very quickly, so make sure you're not near any of these parts. You will have to do functional checks. Keep everything away that shouldn't be there. They will not stop, okay? And they do operate quite quickly. Okay. This is the old Tornado that I used to work on. I can see them working there. So that's them closed, then go back into storage, back in line with the engine. Okay. So that's them closed and open as normal. Again, these can all be opened and closed when you're on the ground. So your weight on wheel switch will energize the circuit. So when you do select thrust reverse, it can only be operated on the ground. Okay. All right. So that's the retractable ejector type. Cold stream reversal. I must get the video up in this one. It's working my old PowerPoint, but it wasn't working this one. Here we have the cowling, which just slides back the way, okay, which opens up this area here, which opens up the cascade vanes. And again, these cascade vanes are now at 45 degrees, blowing the air all around 45 degrees. Okay, you still have the core engine gas coming out the back end, but remember, this is a high bypass engine, so the thrust is coming from the cold stream air. That's your cascade type. So in normal operation, there's your cold stream air going past over the exhaust, okay, out the main engine as well. So you have the exhaust gas and then you have your cold stream gas. You'd have the hot stream coming out here, the cold stream, which is your thrust air, coming out over the top of the core engine. And then when they're activated, it blocks off the cold stream air and again directs it again also at 45 degrees. So that's the door. It slides back the way, slides forwards and backwards. Okay. The main thing is, as before, it does not affect the core engine. With all that in mind, you can, on commercial aircraft, you can, once you select the thrust reverse, you can then put engine power up to roughly 50% more power up to where it was. Military aircraft, we can go up to 80%, but for commercial civilian aircraft, you can speed the engine back up to about 50%. So once you select thrust reverse, once it's selected, you can move your throttle forward, and that will go up to about 50% maximum. That's all you need. And then once you slow down to a certain speed, you should deselect thrust reverse, because if you're almost stopped, well, all that air is going forward, there's a chance it could be blowing debris on the ground, which then could be sucked back into the engine. We don't want that. So we only use thrust reverse for limited time and or up until a certain speed. Where we're slow enough, we don't need thrust reverse anymore. So that's your three main types: clamshell, retractable ejector, and Coldstream. Okay, three main types there. And also you've got your reverse pitch on your propeller. Again, there's a just showing the effects of the gas coming out with the current being slid back. So there's the air coming back. Again, a bit of a wet day, wet runway, so you see it's blowing all the water and the moisture. And again, if you're going too slow, there's a chance that could be sucked back into the engine. Again, if there's any debris in the ground, we don't want that as well. So again, only use as required. Now, selection of thrust reverse will vary again for the type of aircraft. We saw in Module 17, we can select the power lever back into the beta range. Okay, once we're on the ground, again, weight on wheel switch. We also mentioned Module 17, we've got these rollover levers. Okay, these rollover levers. Now, these can only be activated when the throttle is fully at idle, because there's a mechanical stop. When the throttle is above idle to maximum, you cannot lift these levers up and over. That's why they're called roller levers. But once it's at idle, then there's an indentation. We can access the levers and lift them up and over. And once that's selected, then we can move the whole throttles back up to about 50%. Okay. Again, we'll cover more of that in Module 17. Anything else I want to mention on that one? Yeah, if we have a failure of the reverse thrust system, it will cancel the circuit and it will hold the reverse retractable ejector, the clamshell, or whatever it is, back in the stowed position. In the stowed position, it's locked back to where it was originally, and that will initiate a micro switch and let the system know, computer know that thrust reverse has not been selected. If per chance you haven't selected thrust reverse and you've landed and your light comes on in the cockpit saying you've got thrust reverse out, but you've not selected it, what could have happened there is potentially there's just a bit of play with the locking mechanism. It's allowed the micro switch to open, okay, when it shouldn't be open. It's not saying that your thrust reverse is out, but it's certainly letting the pilot that, it appears that one of the buckets or the clamshell or whatever appears to be unlocked. Again, that needs to be investigated. So when you are repairing these systems and you're setting them up, you make sure the measurements are carried out in accordance with your maintenance manual, and you set the micro switches and the storage positions in the correct position. Okay, the things like the FADEC needs to know the position of the buckets, the retractable ejectors, the cascade vanes, etc., before it can select engine power as well. Okay. Normally, again, apart from some lights will indicate the position of the reverse being stowed or deployed, again, as well as failure. So you might get a light that's saying they are stowed. We don't want light when it's stowed in there. We don't want light saying it's in, because that's just an extra light for the pilot to look at. If everything's working fine and there's no problem, there should be no lights on. But as soon as you activate something or something's moved out of position, then we need to let the pilot or even yourself as engineers testing the system to say, yep, that has come out. And it might change over to deployed. In olden days, we used to have a thing called doll's eyes, which was an analog switch or indication that would go from crosshatch to blank or black, whatever it was, to allow us to say that, okay, that thrust reverse is in, it's deployed, or it's stowed. And that's it. We don't need to know in between that. We just need to know if it's actually in or it's fully out. Okay, and it was just a mechanical indicator switch. It wasn't a light. It was just like a doll's eye. A doll's eye would move. Okay, and that's about it for that. Again, we went more into it on Module 17. Yeah, when you are on the ground, if you're testing thrust reverse systems, again, you maybe change one of the components into the thrust reverse system. Make sure you've got the aircraft on a suitable place to start the engine for a start. And when you do select thrust reverse, make sure all your panels are secure. Anybody else that's working the area are being informed that you're ready to start reverse thrust. Put running guards on the front of the intakes. And again, only operate them for as long as necessary. Have safety people involved, because when you select thrust reverse, that will blow the air forward, obviously, and there's potential, as I said before, debris being put into the system. And keep yourself away from natural mechanisms. All right. If you have a problem with any mechanisms, you shut the engine down. You do not keep power on and go and have a look. Okay, because these components, once they move, they will not stop, and they'll take your head off or anything else that should be in there. Okay, so watch the safety precautions as well. Okay. All right. Last bit, we've got noise reduction, and then we'll do a bit of recap. So noise reduction, yeah, we've got big spinny metal things attached to the aircraft called engines. Unfortunately, they're quite noisy, but there are ways of helping reduce that noise if possible. With environmental friendly techniques, we can, some of the old engines, especially pure jet engines, were very, very noisy, very, very dirty and so on. And again, commercial aircraft now, by having higher bypass engines, that cold air helps insulate the hot, raspy air in between. So there's a few things we can do to help reduce noise reduction. So the main ones, there's three main methods of reducing the noise from a jet engine. Strange enough, use a lower power throttle setting for takeoff. If you've got a long runway, do you need to have your engine at full power? No, just maybe 80%. So it might take a bit longer to take off, but you don't have to have the full power there. Nice and simple, easy one that then. Wrap the engine in a noise insulating material. Yeah, there's special sort of honeycomb type things we can use. Insulating blankets where we can help muffle the noise. Okay, and to do with the engine cowlings and the doors, all that good stuff. Reduce the velocity of the jet efflux or increase the velocity of the surrounding ambient air into the exhaust. In other words, actually induce the atmospheric air to cover the hot air. And what we've got here, some noise levels. Now, good ones to remember here is this is the back of the exhaust. So your hot air is coming out, okay, making shock waves. You've got the stationary ambient air all around here. Now, the closer you are to the back of the exhaust, you get what's called small eddies. Just like an eddy current in your electricity, eddies, high frequency, very high pitch noise, okay? So that's the small ones, just straight after the exhaust itself. So lots of very small eddies, rotating very hard against the atmospheric pressure, ripping through the air, causes very high pitch noise. As they slow down, they're still tumbling. It's basically high intensity turbulent air. As it slows down, the turbulent air gets bigger, slows down a bit, but then we get a lower rumble, so we get a low frequency noise. So again, make a highlight of these ones, guys. Small eddies at the front, large eddies at the rear. So small at the front is high frequency, large eddies at the rear, or as the downwash, it becomes a lower rumble. Okay. So I mentioned suppression. Obviously, we've got lower throttle settings. We can bring the throttle back for takeoff. We can use some sort of insulating blankets, which have a honeycomb type support. You can see on the diagram there. And that just helps using a layer of air in between to dilute the noise straight from the engine. Okay, if we have just one panel, it will go through quite easily. If we have layers and layers of panels using a honeycomb effect, we can dilute the noise and reduce the type of sound that's coming out of there, which makes things a lot better. Examples of a high bypass, okay, or a low bypass. So we've got the inlet there of the compressor. So a low bypass engine is quite almost a pure jet. So you can see here on the jet axis, the compressor, the noise, what goes in comes out, is pretty much the same. The turbine jet pipe, okay, and just the efflux of the jet gas causes quite a lot of noise. All right. But by having a high bypass, using colder air, we can actually reduce the size of these circles, okay, which helps reduce the amount of noise we're actually inducing. Long, smelly, noisy engine or a short, larger engine, but using colder air makes it a lot quieter. There's a pure jet or even a low bypass engine, there's a lot of hot air coming at the back end, so it's ripping through standing air as well. So it makes it a lot noisier. So you see quite a substantial difference between a low bypass and a high bypass. Standard plane nozzle, well, we've got the pressure thrust here at the back. So the air is ripping out. So again, you'll have around the front here, you'll have the small eddies, the high frequency, and the large eddies at the back. So again, high noise level, very intense noise level. But if we can induce the atmospheric air which is surrounding the engine into the gas flow by using the cold surrounding air, we can help reduce that. And we use what we call these they call them ejectors. But how does this work? Well, you've got the hot gas coming out very quickly. So if it's coming out at high velocity, it's going to be low pressure. Still be hot, even though it's low temperature. So if that's low pressure, your surrounding air outside the engine is going to be high pressure. Well, high pressure wins. So in effect, we're using Venturi action. We're inducing the high pressure air, which is cold, into the efflux, and that helps to insulate the hot air or the hot gas coming out, and that will also help to reduce the noise. And you might see something like this in some aircraft you might be working on. Okay, so they call them ejectors, but actually injecting the cold air into it by Venturi action. So from a high pressure outside to a low pressure inside, purely because of the velocity of the gas that's coming out of the exhaust. Okay. Right. Actually, that one. Noise levels are classed as in decibels. You've probably had that phrase before, decibels. So the higher decibel, the higher the noise. Again, when you work in a noisy environment, make sure you wear ear defenders on. Don't be subjected to intense noise levels for too long a time, because you will end up with permanent hearing damage. And again, working in aircraft is a noisy environment. So what you're supposed to have is those little yellow plugs in your ear and in your ear defender on top. Don't feel the hero and leave them off, think, I'm okay, I'm okay. When you get older, that can affect prolonged damage to your hearing. So make sure you wear ear defenders at appropriate times. Okay, that's about that one for there. Suspension, wrapping, yeah, okay. Right, so the last part of book one is some gas turbine definitions. Okay, so we'll run through some of these and then we'll start recapping and where we get on from there. So, first one, adiabatic process. Is without looking in books, does anybody know what that means? Adiabatic.
No, it lost.
What do you think? Anybody heard that before? Adiabatic?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes,
so
we have heard.
This is the theoretical. This is the ideal engine where there is
no heat loss.
Yeah, no heat loss. So it's a theoretical one, but it never happens. We always have real engines. They're not theoretical. So in an ideal process, there would be no heat loss, and that's your adiabatic. So expansion contraction is adiabatic where there is no loss or gain of heat by the working fluid. So a theoretical ideal engine. But we don't have that, unfortunately. We've got the next one. Isothermal process, which is the opposite of adiabatic. This is where there is heat loss.
Constant temperature.
Yeah. Expansion contraction is isothermal. Okay, thermal being heat. The condition of gas is changed at a constant temperature, and there is heat loss in this case. Your standard real engine. Momentum thrust. Well, momentum, that means movement. We've got thrust, so it gives you a rough clue what's going on. So this is the thrust produced due to the change of momentum of the gases, the airflow going through the engine. Okay, so momentum thrust, how fast that moves through the engine. Pressure thrust, we mentioned that already just before lunch. What do you think pressure thrust was? Who remembers what pressure thrust was? Anybody? If I said to you choked, does that ring a bell?
Choke model condition.
Sonic.
Yeah, Sonic, yeah. Think of Sonic the Hedgehog. Okay, it's thrust produced by choke nozzle condition causing a pressure difference across the nozzle. The pressure builds up at the producing nozzle, the atmospheric pressure, then it will just like burst out. That is your pressure thrust. Now, that also depends on the size of the nozzle. Make sure it's the correct nozzle. Gross thrust. Think of gross thrust as your wages. You get a gross wage, you get net wage. So gross thrust is everything. And that is the thrust produced by the total work done on the gas stream and a combination of, I might highlight it in red next time, is a combination of momentum thrust and pressure thrust. In other words, yeah, momentum plus pressure thrust equals gross thrust. If you remember that one, that's probably remember all the wording. Momentum plus pressure thrust equals gross. So think of gross thrust and gross wages. You've got everything. The movement of the air and the final pressure thrust at the back end. Then we go on to net thrust. Well, net, again, got your wages. You get gross wage, you get net wage, you get tax, you get your net wage. So momentum thrust or intake drag. Okay, well, momentum thrust or intake drag. What's the drag due to the momentum of the air passing into the engine relative to the aircraft forward speed? So remember, as I said about ram effect, where the intake is moving along the air and the air is getting pushed into the intake, well, it's going to stick to the intake a little bit. So we'll get the drag of the air as it touches the skin of the intake, depending on how fast that aircraft is moving. So the more friction of the air in the intake, momentum thrust or intake drag. Now net thrust, as it sort of jumped ahead there, but gross thrust, momentum thrust plus pressure thrust equals gross thrust. But net thrust, well, it's a bit less than that. So net thrust is gross thrust minus momentum drag. Okay. So gross thrust, momentum is the momentum thrust plus pressure thrust. Well, this time net thrust is just all your wages taxed. Okay. In other words, the momentum drag that is in your intake. Ram ratio. Well, that's the difference from outside air to the air within the intake, and what we call is the engine intake pressure to static pressure at aircraft intake. That's P0 and P1. P0 is your static pressure, and P1 is the pressure within the intake. So it's a ratio of that one. And depending on what that ratio is, depends how much fuel we put in the engine, which is all controlled either mechanically in old systems or by good old FADEC, which we'll cover later on next few books. So the higher the ram ratio, that means the faster the aircraft's going. Yeah, it's ramming more air in. The lower the number, okay, and the slower it's going. Total head pressure. Well, that's just you guys before you sit an exam. You're like that. Oh my goodness, I've got a module 15 exam. Nah, you'll be okay. I'm sure you'll be okay. So the pressure of air when brought to a rest ahead of intake at supersonic flow. Compressor inlet pressure must be as near as possible to total pressure. Okay, that's total head pressure. So it's as we compress the air just before the intake at supersonic flow, inlet pressure must be near as close to the total pressure. Okay, so it's almost like ram pressure. Effects of humidity. Well, yeah, the more moisture in the air, the less oxygen. The drier the air, the better the air is for an engine. So humid air will always give less thrust. We go back to good old module 8 and stuff like that as well, because water vapor is less dense than dry air, and therefore the weight of the air into the engine is less. In other words, we'd have to go faster to get more air, to get more oxygen due to humid effect. And obviously it's humid, depending on temperature, we could have icing conditions as well. So a humid day, less oxygen, it makes the engine harder to breathe. That's basically what it's saying. Compressor efficiency. How do we determine if a compressor is efficient? Well, go back to your adiabatic isothermal processes. Compressor efficiency determined by the temperature rise to the compressor. If there was too large an increase, then that means it is not an inefficient as an efficient compressor. Okay, so if you've got a really large high temperature rise to the compressor, well, that's a lot of heat energy. Well, we could be using that heat energy to better effect. Which out of the two compressors, axial flow or centrifugal, which one's going to have the initial highest temperature rise? Centrifugal or axial flow? Which one do you think will be not as efficient as the other one?
Axial one.
You would think, because more stages, but remember, you're only getting 25 degrees per stage. There might be a lot of stages, but it's nice and gradual. Centrifugal one has 4.5, remember, pressure rise. Well, 4.5 compared to a 1.1, 1.2 to 1 per stage, it's going to have a far intense heat rise compared to an axial flow. So actually, a centrifugal compressor is not as thermally as efficient as a axial flow one. Okay, and especially put two centrifugal compressors together. You can have a high pressurized, great. You can also have a very extreme high temperature rise. So a lot of energy will be wasted. So out of the two, your centrifugal is not as good. Plenum chamber. Anybody heard of a plenum chamber? Some of you will have them on motorbikes. Keep using motorbikes as usual. The cars, but a plenum chamber. Some of these have a little black box on top of your carburetor. There's nothing inside it. It's just a little black box. Okay, and all that does is a chamber or a large amount of duct in an air system which you use to dampen out pulsations and airflow. Okay, so it's supplied at a constant value. So when on your motorbikes, some of these will have them, some don't. Some of the older bikes did. The air will come in, and any excess air will stay there until it's ready to use. Okay, it's all calibrated. And we'll look at a plenum chamber later when we look at which one? APUs. APUs have got plenum chamber. So it's basically just an empty box that takes out any rough moving air, lets it stabilize, damps pulsation flow, so then it's supplied at a nice, smooth, constant. So it comes in, swirls about, and it'll stay in there, and then it'll eventually come in towards the combustion system. So that's a plenum chamber. Okay, and the last one, power turbine. We'll hopefully know what that is by now. So what's a power turbine?
It's a free turbine.
Yeah, also known as a feed turbine, yeah. Sometimes referred to as a feed turbine assembly, not mechanically connected to a compressor. Okay, so with that's the end of part one. If you had the new books, we've got, so this it was, we've got 87 questions for you. So I think what we'll do, let's see where we are. We'll go for an early break now instead of quarter past. We'll go for a break now. Come back about 20 minutes, and then we'll just do a lot of recap for the whole of book one. Okay, we'll recap as much as we can for book one, and then we'll start on book two probably tomorrow morning first thing. Okay, so we'll just recap everything as we got through, and I'll dig out some other questions that I've got on PowerPoints for you as well. But hopefully you get your new book soon, so you can use the revision questions where possible. So we'll have an early break now. Come back in about 20 minutes. And then we'll do a lot of recap for today and start book two tomorrow. Okay. Right, we'll see you in about 20 minutes, guys. And we'll get lots of questions.
Okay. See you. Yeah, okay.
आवाज आइरहेको हो केटाहरु?
ओ हरि
हजुर दाइ
ओ
हजुर
हेरी हेरी
भन्नु
के भएर
म त भर्खर जोइन
के छ
एकछिन
update?
गरे म जेरो के अपडेट छैन
हेरी खाना खायो हेरी?
भर्खरै खाएँ यार त्यो यतिको खोलेर
खाना खाइसक्यो?
खाइसक्यो त म यहाँ यति मोबाइलमा गरेँ हिन्दीमा अहिले
अब
ल्यापटपमा
त्यो
भर्खर एकछिन बज्यो
डेफिनेसनको लागि चाहिँ के हेरेर सबै बुके त पढ्यो भने त्यसले